Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Bringing you live coverage of the conference speech of the Liberal Democratic leader, Tim Farron. He may only have 8 MPs to show for his 2.4 million people who voted LibDem at the election, but they're meeting for their annual conference. Not in a phone box, as some of the crueler commentators have suggested, but in Brighton. And Mr. Farron, who said he'd like to imitate the Canadian Liberal leader and President and Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, is going to tell his party that he too can help the party leapfrog back into power. We're sure he didn't want any other comparisons to be drawn with the international heartthrob that is Mr. Trudeau.
What are you implying?
Nothing.
And joining us to listen to the speech, one LibDem who knows a bit about the party both in and out of power, Polly Mackenzie. She worked for Nick Clegg in Downing Street when he was Deputy Prime Minister. Welcome to the show, Polly Mackenzie. Let's start by saying there's been a lot of talk when I've talked to Liberal Democrats about increasing membership numbers, about recent by-election wins. But to me, that just smacks of a throwback to the past when that was the only evidence the LibDems had of any popularity with voters.
Well, there haven't been many general elections in the past year for them to measure themselves against or parliamentary contests. So in a way, it's not surprising. The only thing that's happening in electoral politics is things like membership numbers and local council by-elections. And, you know, they're seizing those opportunities. You're right, it's not sufficient as a path back to power, but it's at least a start.
Smacks of desperation?
It's the only thing going, and it's better to do something than nothing.
But even in the general election aside, there were the London elections, the mayoral elections. They pitted those as something that they would do well in, and they didn't do very well there either. In fact, they came 4th and 5th.
Well, London is a particularly challenging thing for Liberal Democrats, and it's never really...
Very pro-European.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's because actually all of the parties adopt a very centre-liberal narrative. The Conservatives are very liberal, the Labour Party is in London, and actually that means there isn't quite space for the Liberal Democrats. It's across the country where that Liberal voice might have more of an opportunity.
I mean, apparently former MPs like Vince Cable in Twickenham and Simon Hughes from Southwark and Bermondsey are on snap election alert. Is that wise?
Well, I mean, it's possible that there's going to be an election. It doesn't.
Do you believe that?
I believe that it's possible. It doesn't look particularly likely to me, but again, better to be prepared and ready to campaign than in a mess like the Labour Party is.
Right, so is that the sort of talk amongst Liberal Democrats, and should it be in your mind that they're poised to spring into action and campaign in their former seats that they lost in the general election on an issue, for instance, like a second referendum on the deal for Brexit?
Well, I think Tim has started to set out a clear message, which he would put forward if there was a general election soon. You know, if Theresa May did decide to call an election, who knows what it would be about. You know, the noise is about grammar schools, but I can't imagine her calling an election on that. So actually focusing on the big issue of the day, which is Brexit, and setting out our position on it makes sense to me.
How long do you think? I mean, having been in power, in coalition, how much has that damaged on its own, the Liberal Democrat brand, for any chance of them regaining some of the seats that they lost?
Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it? The Lib Dems are down to 8 seats, and we paid an enormous price for those 5 years in power, where we got to change the country in a whole variety of ways. In a way, we kind of spent 70 years of political capital on that 5 years in power. I hope it doesn't take 70 years to get back, but it would be foolhardy to pretend that the impact hasn't been enormous. We have given away the none of the above vote, and it seems to be lodged very firmly with UKIP at the moment, and you know that's pretty heartbreaking for me to see that kind of generic anyone but Labour or the Conservatives vote lodged with a party that I basically find abhorrent. What
do you think is the strongest message for the Liberal Democrats now?
Well, the message that Tim is really pushing is that he is the leader who can unite parties around the centre-left and be the decent opposition to the Conservatives. There isn't a decent opposition at the moment, and actually finding, you know, as Theresa May develops as the Prime Minister and stumbles, there does need to be a voice kind of.
How can
really
it be the
challenging
decent
her.
opposition with 8 MPs?
Well, it's challenging, of course. It'd be much easier for Jeremy Corbyn to be a decent leader, but Jeremy Corbyn isn't doing a very good job. So there is a vacancy there for a decent, strong voice. I think it comes down to ideas.
A remarkable result. at the next election, say it's in 2020, a remarkable result would be 20 Lib Dem seats from 8. I think unlikely, but remarkable if it happened. How could you be in opposition with even 20 seats? I mean, it's just nonsense, isn't it?
Well, the question is, can you start to tell a story of a different country and a future narrative and a future approach to governing the country? Well, you're right. Like I said, it could even be 70 years for the Liberal Democrats to build up.
Probably
but
a generation, isn't it?
But, you know, actually, every general election, you double or triple your representation. You can see a path back to 50 or 60 MPs as we were before.
But
things change in politics.
But do you think, though, the very policies that the Liberal Democrats, as they see themselves as the sort of centre party of the political spectrum, that they've all been rejected? They were rejected in Brexit, the pro-European views. Some of the liberal internationalist views, they've all been rejected by the electorate as they've looked to UKIP or perhaps to Jeremy Corbyn in terms of parties and the Conservatives. That space in the middle, although it's a gaping hole, is not one that interests voters.
Well, except remember that the Brexit vote was still 52-48, so there's 48% of people who probably do share a lot of the views of the Liberal Democrats, and that's 40 percentage points above where the Lib Dems are doing in the polls at the moment.
Yeah.
So there's a big market out there.
Right.
You have to remember that, you know, Tim's objective at the moment is to rebuild, as Andrew was saying, you know, maybe to 20 or 30 seats or to go beyond that. He's not trying to be a majority government with 52% of the vote.
No, but I don't understand. His policy that's most distinct for at the moment is to have another referendum, to have a second referendum in Europe once the Brexit deal is done. But his top target seats are Torby, North Devon, St Ives, North Cornwall, Yeovil. Do you want me to tell you the majorities for Brexit in these constituencies?
Go on then.
Huge, 60-40 in some cases.
Well,
so how does that work? I mean, again, it's a nonsense. How can you take that position and target seats which are overwhelmingly Eurosceptic?
It's a question of bringing together the strong local campaigning, the increasing disenfranchisement people will have with the government of the day. And also, I think what we'll see in Tim's speech is him starting to build other policies to come around that, to talking about education and health. We've already seen some announcements there, to build a clearer narrative about an opposition that goes beyond
Can we
Brexit.
agree that calling for another referendum won't help in these constituencies?
OK.
OK, good. On that point of agreement, we'll move on. I think it's fair to say that the number of journalists at the seaside with the Lib Dems is smaller than it has been in recent years. But after an exhaustive search, we found two brave souls who've travelled to Brighton to listen to Mr. Farron. It's Matt Chorley from The Times, Kate McCann from The Telegraph. And there they are. Let's get both of you. Start with you, Matt Chorley. Set the scene for us. What's it like down there?
It's been a bit drizzly. Some of us who came down hoping to have a bit of sunshine at the seaside have been
Oh,
disappointed.
weather forecast I'm looking for. It's a political forecast.
Yeah. I mean, as ever with the Lib Dems, they're relentlessly optimistic about the future. It's all going to be all right in the end, as they always have been. The whole time they were in coalition and we were predicting doom and gloom, they said, oh, it's all going to be all right in the end. We know how that happened. They're still relentlessly optimistic and positive. They think it's all going to be all right.
Kate, how do you take it?
Well, it's certainly quieter than it has been in previous years, I have to say. And I think Tim Farron has a challenge with his speech this morning to try and get people revved up for the year ahead. But there should be a couple of interesting things that we know he's going to say about the NHS, about schools. We think he's probably going to say something, make an appeal to Labour voters, so that could be worth watching out for.
Do you think anybody's listening? Matt Chorley?
Well, that's their big. That is their big problem, isn't it? And they, they're still 8% in the polls now. They ended 2010 at 8% after all the tuition fee stuff. They left government at 8%. They're still at 8%. It seems like no matter what they do, change of leader, being out of government, being relentlessly pro-European, it doesn't seem to be shifting the dial at all. There's that core 8% who are still determined to vote Lib Dem, and nobody else seems to be listening. And I think Tim Farron is working harder and harder and harder at trying to change that with increasingly bold language, taking on issues that maybe other political parties wouldn't, whether that's putting up taxes or legalising cannabis or appealing to the Labour moderates, if you like. But yeah, the big problem is we're here, but it's whether or not anyone else is paying any attention outside. Isn't
the problem that they face, Kate, is that you've got the Labour Party moving further to the left, lots of unhappy centrist Labour MPs, and on the Conservative side, centrist Tory MPs unhappy about the Brexit vote. They wanted to stay in. Mr. Farron's presenting himself as a sort of centrist or moderate centre-left, strongly pro-EU, but nobody wants to hug him. Nobody's hugged him.
Well, I mean, maybe it's still early days and Tim Farron is hoping that he can make an impression in the coming months when things become a little bit more stark, perhaps.
You don't
So
sound
Jeremy
very
Corbyn is
convinced. You
likely
don't
to
sound very
win.
convinced by that.
Well, I hate to make predictions given what's happened in recent months. I wouldn't want to put my money on any particular outcome. But what I will say is if Jeremy Corbyn is elected again on Saturday, I think the choice for some Labour voters is going to become very stark very quickly. And I think Tim Farron is hoping that if he continues to make a clear message, a clear appeal to those voters that he is the way to go, that could shift opinions and perhaps that he might have time to do that if Theresa May is determined not to call an election until 2020.
But Matt Chorley, is there any evidence, any indication that disillusioned centrists on either of the two main parties are thinking of hugging Tim Farron?
No.
No.
Bluntly. The problem is, you're absolutely right. There's this huge area in the political centre which has opened up for somebody to try and appeal to both voters and MPs in that area. No, the problem is the LibDems aren't being seen as the vehicle for that, and their major problem is there's only 8 of them in the House of Commons. So it doesn't matter how things need to be pretty bad for disaffected Labour MP, and they are pretty bad for lots of disaffected Labour MPs on the Labour benches. But to give up the position of being, in a group of 200 or so, to move across to that sort of dead corner in the House of Commons where there's only 8 LibDems, you've got to be pretty fed up to do that. And that's the problem. If there were 20 or 30 left, then there might be more appeal there. But as a vehicle for that sort of centrist politics, that's the big problem. Is the LibDems just isn't seen as the way to go.
And Kate, there's a poll in the London Evening Standard today. I think Joe's going to be talking more about it later. It shows that the party itself is 6 or 7 points in the polls now, single figures still, and that Mr. Farron's own personal ratings have flatlined since he became leader, that he has had made no cut through, no impact as of yet on the British public.
That's true, and I wonder how long it might take before we see the Lib Dems start to ask if Tim Farron might be the problem. I hate to say it, minutes before his big speech, but Nick Clegg...
The alternative options are probably even worse. They've got to
well, you never know, Nick Clegg might come back. There was Clegg mania after all, nobody saw that coming. So, perhaps we could see a return to that if he was interested in taking up the leadership again.
Very well, we'll probably have to leave it there as we come to terms with that thought. But before we do, Matt Chorley, you do this thing called red box or blue box or something, is that right?
Red box, yeah.
Red
box.
yes,
that's right.
And
Times.co.uk/redbox email, yeah.
Yeah. And you're giving away mugs. I mean, just a sheer rip-off of the daily politics. Are you not ashamed of yourself?
These are nice mugs.
Should be ashamed of yourself.
These are nice
mugs.
These are very expensive.
I'm reaching out to disaffected daily politics mug fans.
Well, you're not going to sell many then. Anyway, listen, good to talk to you both of you. Thanks for your time this afternoon. And remember, folks, there's only one real thing when it comes to mugs.
Or real mug, were you going to say?
It's the same thing. Is it going to be like this all afternoon?
Who are you calling a real mug? Right, on that. Former Lib Dem leader Paddy Ashdown raised a few eyebrows earlier this week when he suggested that parties on the left should agree on one candidate to take on the Conservatives in the Witney seat vacated by David Cameron. He said it was a naughty thought. So what did party members in Brighton make of his naughty thought? Eleanor Garnier's taken the mood box to find out.
The general election might be a few years away, but there's a certain by-election looming in Witney. But should there just be one candidate going up against the Tories? Should the other parties do a deal or no deal? Oh look, Nick Clegg's doing a book signing. In Witney, do you think there should be a deal between the other parties so only one party goes up against the Tory, one candidate?
So above my pay grade these days, I can't possibly. You'll have to ask the leader that.
No deal. No deal.
No deal. No deal. I think we can win on our own. We don't need anyone else to defer. We hope we can win Witney, so we're going to fight it as hard as we can.
Oh, you've said deal. Why should there be a deal?
Because otherwise, they're very unlikely to unseat him, and there's so much more they agree on than don't agree on. If it was the one candidate and it was our candidate, then yes. But on the basis that it won't probably be that arrangement and the Labour Party wouldn't stand for it, then it's definitely a no deal.
Sorry, coming through. Oh, I just dropped one in. I think I'm going to have to take that one up. I know, that was ballot rigging. I got caught in the act. Oh,
yeah, deal.
Because?
Because I think it's an opportunity to begin to kind of focus going forward for the next few years.
Absolutely no deal. We are quite capable of making a big impact in Witney. We were involved in the Eastleigh by-election. I can remember most of the motorways all the way up and down the country being jammed with busloads of LibDems. I want that to happen again.
I don't think Labour's very competitive, so I'd be happy for them to stand and lose. That would be fine with me.
I believe there should be a deal. I think the progressive parties should work together. The common cause, belief in Europe, belief in democracy.
We've made it to the end of the Nick Clegg book signing queue. No deal, just in the lead. Let's go downstairs and find some more people. Ooh, look who it is. Can we ask you a very quick question? Oh, no time for the daily politics. Should all the other parties do a deal or no deal?
Well, I'm all for doing deals.
Are you?
Yes.
OK. Here you are. Help yourself to a ball.
I'm convinced we should have a LibDem strongly to stand against whoever the Tories put up, and I hope people in that area will vote for them and show what they think of this government.
I'm being asked for my autograph. This is a first. What's your name?
Liam. Well, I'm a great believer in democracy, and democracy means that all the parties should stand candidates.
After that exhausting lap of the LibDem conference, the bag is empty, the results are in, and it's a pretty clear result. A definite no deal.
I think there's a programme called Deal or No Deal. Anyway, I'm joined now from Norwich by the Shadow Defence Secretary, Clive Lewis. He's a Labour MP, keen on the idea of more cooperation with other political parties. Welcome to the Daily Politics, Clive Lewis. So you are firmly behind this idea of cooperating with the Liberal Democrats, for example, in the seat of Witney?
It's something I've given it some thought to. I don't know. It's not for me to make that decision.
But what do you think?
I think the idea of parties coming together, progressive parties coming together to work together on issues that they agree with, I think has a lot of merit, and it's something that I'm very interested in. It does seem a little bit show businessy in terms of taking on David Cameron. I think there is some merit in it, but it's a bit short-sighted, and I think the whole concept of progressive alliance is a bit longer term than simply one by-election standing against David Cameron, as delightful as it would be to see the Tories beaten in that seat.
Right. So do you think it'll work or not?
In Witney?
Yes.
I think it's a very short time frame to be able to cobble together a candidate on which everyone can agree on. Obviously, in Tatton, you had a candidate which everyone kind of realised was the right person for that particular seat, taking on Neil Hamilton. But I don't know whether you'll find that kind of parliamentary candidate in that seat in time.
Well, let's put aside Witney just for one moment. How would it work in other seats, for example, in the longer term? Who would stand aside for whom?
So I think what you're trying to do here is you're talking about some kind of electoral pact where people stand, and I think there's a lot of work that's got to be done on this. And I think if that was the case, then that's something that all the political parties, progressive political parties, would need to talk about. But there's another issue here which I think I'd like to bring in, which is the whole concept of what you would stand on. And I think one of the key issues which I think most progressive parties, including UKIP, which isn't a progressive party, could agree on, is that we need to change the electoral system to a proportional representative system. Right. So I think if you made that the key thing around which you focused a general election campaign to say, we all believe that we need PR, you get over the first past the post line and then instigate proportional representation and then call another election. There are lots of options. I think what we need to do is start having this discussion.
All right, well, we're starting it. We're starting it here on the programme. So let's bring in Polly to enter into this discussion. On that basis, if the goal was changing the electoral system, for example, it'd be worth it, wouldn't it, going in with Clive Lewis and his party?
Well, I don't disagree with anything Clive said, really, and long thought that proportional representation or a change to our voting system would be a tremendous change to improve our democracy. But of course, we had a referendum on a voting system change back in 2011.
Although not PR, of course.
Of course, not PR, but nonetheless, I think the idea that you could bring a progressive alliance together and then win a majority on the basis of we're going to deliver you proportional representation, I think is a bit ambitious.
Right. Do you actually agree? Right. Sorry, Clive. No, you come back in. What did you want to say?
I just wanted to say, I think political parties would stand on a manifesto other than just PR, but one thing that they would all agree on is that if we can get past the first past the post system and get in, then PR is what is the key thing that we would instigate, and then you could potentially call another election based on PR, and then you could then all go your own separate ways or form alliances as you saw fit.
All right,
Clearly, all the political parties would have their own manifestos, but that would be something that they all had in common and run through them.
What do you say to that, Polly?
Well, I think you're right, Joe, that the challenge is then sort of chopping up who gets what, which feels like a kind of shady backroom deal and precisely the kind of thing that we're trying to abolish. You know, it becomes very challenging. I don't think anybody's yet come forward with an answer to how you solve that conundrum.
Right, OK, but hang on, Clive. So you're in a precarious situation, arguably, in your seat in Norwich South. It's stuffed with Liberal Democrats and Greens, so no wonder you like the idea.
I think there's a couple of reasons why, just to come back onto this point. I think if you're going to be talking about in terms of a progressive alliance, it's not simply about what's in the interest of one political party. We all, I think, understand that having a political system, a voting system, which gives people a real say in their country, is good. So I think ultimately that's what this is about. That's what it comes down to. And in terms of making this work, this can't be a top-down. We will tell our local parties how you are going to, who's going to, it has to come from the bottom up as well.
Would you step aside in your seat to allow a Liberal Democrat or a Green, for example, to stand on a sort of common themes that you agreed with in order to keep the seat from the Tories?
So I've actually thought long and hard about this. If there was an electoral pact and a progressive alliance where it was the difference between actually having a voting system which enabled our democracy to have a better form of governance, then yes, I would.
Right. You would stand aside. Right.
Yeah.
Do you think others would do the same? I mean, when you look at how you're polling or how the Liberal Democrats are polling at the moment, anything to improve the chances of winning a seat for the Progressive Alliance left would be a good thing.
I think that's right, and I think Clive's showing, great honour in his willingness to put himself forward. The problem is, as we've seen at the conference with the vote, is that actually the most tribal people in the country are political party activists, and in the end they're the ones that choose the candidates. So delivering that seat by seat and getting people to stand aside would be an incredible challenge. And of course the worst place to start would be Witney, where however many parties you bring together, they would lose.
All right, just briefly, Clive Lewis, which proposal are you backing for the shadow cabinet elections, that actually they should be elected by MPs, by you and your peers, or in this hybrid third?
Well, it's not my decision. The decision will be made by...
it's not your decision, but you will have a view.
I do have a view, and I expressed that yesterday. It will be made by the NEC later today. I personally think that if you're going to have a system of electing the shadow cabinet, I think it needs to be part of a wider package of democratic reforms in our party. And I think part of that could be looking at how we engage the membership, the affiliates in that process, and also the MPs. I think everyone should have a stake in it, and of course the leader, whoever the leader of the Labour Party is.
So you do like the hybrid? Anyway,
I do prefer that, yeah.
Right, oh good. Well, that was all you had to say. Thank you very much for coming on to our LibDem special programme, all part of the new Progressive Alliance.
He said it in the end.
It did, thank you.
She's very impatient this afternoon. News coming in from New York as we've been on air that the relatives of the man apprehended for the bombings in New York left the country before the bombings. His wife left for Pakistan, but was apprehended in the United Arab Emirates before she got on to Pakistan. And the mother had left for Turkey before the attacks and hasn't yet returned. She left several weeks before, hasn't yet returned to the United States. That will be part of the ongoing inquiry by both the New York police and the federal authorities. Now, the Lib Dems yesterday voted to back a policy of calling for a second referendum on terms of the Brexit deal. Not everybody's happy. Vince Cable warned that such a move would be, quote, disrespectful to voters. But the plan is supported by other senior Democrats, Liberal Democrats, including Nick Clegg. It's not the first time Mr Cable and Mr Clegg have disagreed. Here's the former Lib Dem Deputy Prime Minister.
I think under pressure from their more swivel-eyed backbenchers, under pressure from the sort of Brexit press, under pressure from their own internal contradictions, They will move remorselessly towards a hard Brexit, not only taking us out of the European Union, but taking us out of the single market as well. And when they do that, they will do untold damage to the British economy. They will undo an extraordinary British achievement, the creation of the world's largest borderless marketplace anywhere. And at that point, they can never say again, having done so much damage to our great country because of their obsession about Europe, they can never again say that they are a responsible party of government. Thank you.
Nick Clegg getting a rousing reception from the party faithful there in Brighton. We go back to Brighton now. We're joined by the Liberal Democrats Home Affairs spokesman, Alistair Carmichael. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Did the Lib Dems propose a second referendum during the referendum campaign?
No, we didn't. During the referendum campaign, we were out there front and centre making the case to remain part of the European Union. We then have to respond to the situation that's presented to us by the result on the 23rd of June. Our response is to say, looking at what happened, you had a contest between two propositions. Essentially, there was a known one, what we have if we remain, an unknown, what would happen if we were to leave. It's difficult to make a decision between a known and an unknown. We're now in a position where we're going to have a negotiation. We will ultimately, from that negotiation, have a deal. At that point, you have two known propositions, and we say it's not disrespectful to the voters. In fact, just the opposite. It gives the voters the final say, having voted for departure, is this the destination to which you wanted to go?
But you knew all that during the referendum campaign, that would be the situation. You knew there wasn't there wasn't a detailed plan and that it would have to be negotiated. But you didn't tell us there would be a second referendum. You've only come for a replay because you lost the first time.
No, what we have said is that since we have the people have spoken, 17 million people gave a mandate to the British government to go off and to negotiate. That's now what has to happen. They have to negotiate in good faith. They have to get the best possible deal. And at the end of that deal, it should then be put to the people. I think there's actually an important national interest at play here. Referendums by their nature are fairly divisive and polarising exercises. And if we are to bring the whole country back together again, I think it's important that everybody, whether you're in the 48% or the 52%, can be satisfied that the country is getting what it expected to get. And for that reason, a referendum on the deal is important.
Right, but hold on. You describe referenda as polarising and divisive. I'd like to remind you, as the Liberal Democrats were the first national party to propose an in-out referendum in the first place. That was, at one stage, your party's policy. Now, when you proposed that, did you propose a second referendum on the outcome?
Look, we've always said that the issue of Europe and the future of our position in the European Union was a grumbling sore, if you like, in British politics, and it was going to have to be addressed at some point. Ideally, probably Margaret Thatcher should have put the Single European Act in 1987.
My question was that when you were first proposing a referendum, did you propose a second referendum on the terms of the negotiation?
Well, no, of course we didn't, Andrew. You know that perfectly well.
Well, why not, if it's a good idea now?
No, listen, just let me explain then. Once you are presented with a particular set of circumstances, a particular set of facts, then I think it's perfectly legitimate and appropriate that a political party should respond to that. I think that's what the British people expect, and I've got absolutely no shame in doing exactly that. I think it's responsible politics which ultimately will bring our position in the world stage back to where it needs to be.
When would this referendum take place?
Once we know the terms of the deal. So Theresa May and her ministers, Boris Johnson, Liam Fox, David Davis, have to go off. They have to negotiate with the other member states. They have to give the clearest possible detail of the future relationship with the European Union. And once we know what that means, then at that stage, we should have the second vote. This could be possibly even a couple of years down the line. But, you know, this is why Theresa May at the moment keeps saying Brexit means Brexit, because frankly, as soon as she tries to give any more detail on that, does it mean in the single market or out the single market? Does it mean hard Brexit? Does it mean an end to free movement of labour and goods? Then she knows that there are enormous splits in her own party.
I understand that, but I want to ask you, I'm asking you about the timetable, because it'll probably take the full 2 years allowed under Article 50 to do what will be a complicated negotiation. At the end of that 2 years, we're out. That's Article 50. So what's the point of your referendum? Are you going to ask Europe, all of Europe, to delay us leaving until you've had your referendum?
If you look at the terms of Article 50, it's pretty short and it's pretty general in its terms. I don't think this is something that is going to be governed entirely by the law here. I think this is a question where ultimately the deciding and decisive factors will be political rather than legal.
Excuse me,
I think there's still a tremendous will in the European Union to keep Britain in there.
To suspend Article 50 beyond 2 years, you need all 27 members to agree. You need them all.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't have your referendum. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. We know that there's a time limit on Article 50. That is something that will have to be in the mind of Theresa May and her negotiating team. Look, I'm not saying that this is some sort of panacea. I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. What I am saying, though, is that there is an existential crisis for the European Union, a project for which I remain passionately committed. I remain of the view that it is essential for our country to be at the heart of Europe, and I think that it is important for that reason that we should be clear as a country that if we are going to leave, then we should be we should be in a position of knowing exactly the terms of which we are leaving.
Really
That's not the case at the moment.
You really think the other 27 members of the European Union are going to spend hours and days and weeks negotiating our terms of exit on something that we may then change our mind? You really think they're going to play ball with that?
I think that most, in fact, I've never heard anybody in the European Union say that they want Britain to leave. I've never found anything other than utter bewilderment at the prospect that we should do.
But they've said now we have voted to leave, we should get on with it.
If we make this part of our negotiating approach to the European Union, then yes, I do believe that they will cooperate with us. I believe it's in the interests of the European Union that Britain should be in there, as well as Britain's interest to be in there as
Have you asked any other members of the European Union if they go along with this second referendum idea?
Sadly, Andrew, I'm no longer a government minister. It's not for me to conduct the negotiations.
No, I was just asking if you've sounded them out.
What we believe should happen. No, I've not approached it. I have no locus.
So you have no idea whether they go along with this?
Perfectly well. It's something we're at the start of a long negotiation process. I think it's the sort of thing that the government should be bottoming out.
You just said earlier you said you were passionate about Europe, and Europe was in an existential crisis. Why are you passionate about something that's in an existential crisis?
I'm passionate about the idea that since the end of the Second World War, cooperation amongst European nations, principally through the European Union, but also through other organisations like the Council of Europe and NATO, has kept us at peace. You know, and I think we underestimate the impact of that at our peril.
So why is it an existential crisis?
It's an existential crisis because you see that across Europe, a number of political forces on the far right, especially, have been emboldened by what they see as being behind the vote in Britain to leave the European Union.
Well,
I think that's possibly the law of unintended consequences of operation there.
Madame Le Pen was riding high in the polls before the Brexit vote. The Five Star Movement was riding high in the polls in Italy before the Brexit vote. The centre-right party in Greece had been wiped out before the Brexit vote. The hard right in Hungary had taken power before Brexit. And a right-wing, non-mainstream government in Poland had taken power in Poland before the Brexit vote. And the Sweden Democrats, which is a hard-right nativist party, were polling third in Sweden before the Brexit vote. So I don't understand where you get this idea that these forces have been unleashed by the vote.
No, you misrepresent what I said there. At no point did I say that that the whole process had been initiated, but it has certainly been emboldened by what they see as the messages behind the Brexit vote. I don't think anybody would dispute that.
All right, Alistair Carmichael, thanks for joining us. We'll see what Mr. Farron has to say.
Yes, we haven't got long to wait. In fact, we might be able to show you some pictures, as the hall will no doubt be filling up and queues outside as people try and get... There we are. It's filled up, in fact, as they're waiting for Tim Farron to take to the stage as leader of the Liberal Democrats there, all waiting patiently. They may not have many MPs, but they have been boasting that they've still got enough members to fill the hall. Now, Tim Farron was elected as leader, promising a Lib Dem fight back. So is there any sign of one? The Liberal Democrats lost 49 MPs at the 2015 general election, winning just 8% of the vote. Since then, the party has made little progress and is currently polling around 7%. The party did gain 45 seats, however, in the English local elections, better than the Tories and Labour, who both lost seats. The party may be worried, however, by the findings of a YouGov survey for Newsnight, to be broadcast tonight. It found 7 out of 10 former Lib Dem voters are uncertain what the party stands for, with 32% saying they're very uncertain. 65% of British adults have no opinion on the question of whether he's doing well or badly as a leader. Joining me now is Joe Twyman, Head of Political and Social Research at YouGov. Welcome to the Daily Politics. So you've done this poll with Newsnight, looking at the levels of support for the Lib Dems. What's your overall takeaway?
Well, my overall takeaway is that there's good news and bad news. 3/4 of those people who voted for the Lib Dems in 2010 but didn't in 2015 and don't support them now say they would vote for the Lib Dems potentially at some stage in the future. And yes, we've seen in local by-elections that things have improved, the membership numbers are up, that's all good news. But there is bad news as well. Really, people are uncertain, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about the general public or Lib Dem supporters, people are uncertain about what they stand for, or indeed what they should stand for. Should they be an opposition to government? Should they be campaigning to stay in the EU? Should they be playing a role in government? Among their supporters, there's no real decision either way on that.
Right.
And if you want to stage this fight back, you need to turn, in the era of 24-hour news, in the era of social media, to the leader. And 2/3 of the public don't know whether he's doing a good or a bad job, including half of Lib Dem voters and even 1/3 of Lib Dem supporters. They don't know whether he's doing a good or bad job.
And of course, it doesn't help if you haven't got a big parliamentary base. You're not going to get the sort of airtime than you might in a bigger party. But in terms of they don't know what the Liberal Democrats stand for, is this message about a second referendum on the Brexit deal not cutting through?
It doesn't appear to be at the moment. When you ask people, should there be a second referendum, generally speaking, it falls along, as you would imagine, the lines of the vote. But even 1/3 of people who voted to remain say there shouldn't be a second referendum. So there's not an overwhelming desire. And among Lib Dem voters, 2/3 of them, yes, voted to stay, but 1/3 voted to leave. It's not the case that overwhelmingly they were
on that, Polly Mackenzie, and listening to that interview with Alistair Carmichael, is this the right way to go for the Liberal Democrats, to tie themselves and try and define themselves as a party of the 48% who voted to remain in the EU?
What's good about it is that it's distinctive, and it appeals in particular to the huge number of Labour voters who voted to remain and who aren't really represented by their current leader, who knows how he voted. I think, as Andrew's interview with Alistair showed, it's quite a messy and complicated policy. But of course, the status quo is messy and complicated too, because we have a government trying to negotiate with really no mandate about what it is that they're supposed to get, except that it must be out.
But even on that, it's not getting any traction in the polls. So is it still a policy that they should be following if it's not gaining any traction?
I think it takes time for any message to get through. I mean,
but it's a fairly clear one, isn't it?
It is a fairly clear one, but, most people don't pay attention to politics most of the time. And so you have to actually just keep saying the same thing a lot until people will listen.
Why would the Europeans, in these 2 years of negotiations, why would they give us anything if they knew there was going to be another referendum?
Well, of course, tactically, if you want us to remain in, that might be quite helpful. They might be offering such a terrible deal that when compared with staying in, it feels better.
But if they gave us a lot that made coming out seem palatable, then another referendum could vote to come out. The European tactic would surely be, no, this is going to be miserable, you're going to get a punishment beating if you leave, you can't have access to the single market, we insist on free movement. Why would they give us anything if they knew another vote was coming?
But if you want us to remain, that's precisely what you want them to do.
No, because you're not voting and negotiating a deal to remain, you're negotiating a deal to leave.
Well, the government is, but of course if Tim Farron was in charge, he'd be wanting us to stay.
Right,
yeah, but on the same terms as we have now.
Yes, I mean, I think the problem, it seems, on this issue is that if there were a second referendum, there'd be more uncertainty. And from your polling, people don't want that.
Yes, they don't at the moment, but of course there is no alternative option set out at the moment. So it's one of those potential areas for leadership, but you can't lead if no one knows what you stand for.
Right. We need to move on because Mr. Farron will be getting to his feet in just a few minutes. And before he makes that big conference speech, let's just remind ourselves of what the Lib Dem leader has been up to over the last 12 months.
We paid a heavy price for our time in government, but we did right by our country.
The Lib Dem leader's just been to see the migrant crisis firsthand. Tim Farron's got his first question to the Prime Minister since he became leader.
Will he agree with the Save the Children plea that we take as a country 3,000 vulnerable, unaccompanied children in Europe, some of whom are as young as 6?
Let's go over to Oldham now.
UKIP, 6,487. Liberal Democrats, 1,024. Labour Party, 17,000.
He may have lied to influence the election, but today Alistair Carmichael was cleared of breaking the law.
Mr. Tim Farron!
The Prime Minister...
Order! However irritating the honourable gentleman may be to government backbenchers, he has a right to be heard.
I am fantastically grateful to you, Mr. Speaker.
Jump to the beat of the party line. Jump to the beat of the party.
We share Europe's history. We share Europe's future. That's why I vote to remain.
The decision taken in 1975 by this country to join the common market has been reversed.
I am frankly utterly gutted and heartbroken.
Vince, what is a good ballroom hold then? Stretching, yes.
The way my teacher tells me to do it is imagine somebody's pulling... That's right.
And a few minutes more, of course, Tim Farron will be taking to the stage for his big speech. But, Joe Twyman, we were talking about the polls. I mean, the Lib Dems are trying to redefine themselves post-coalition. I asked Polly Mackenzie how bad the damage still is. I mean, what are the views of the public about their legacy, if any, in government?
Well, among the general public and indeed among their lost supporters, there's really no overwhelming view one way or the other about whether it was good or whether it was bad or whether they had an influence or not. But 85% of their current supporters believe that actually they were good and they did have a positive influence on government. So there's quite a difference there between the old and the new.
Right, so the old, supporters of the Liberal Democrats, Polly Mackenzie, thought it didn't make much difference at all. I mean, that must be a bit of a blow to those left.
Well, it is a bit of a blow, I think it's perfectly obvious that during those years in coalition we didn't effectively tell the story about the impact we were having. And the problem is that now the Liberal Democrats have left government and the Conservative Party did then lurch off to the right and take us out of Europe and do all sorts of disastrous things and basically mess up running the country. We're too small to be heard saying, I told you so. Plus, of course, I told you so has never been the most effective political campaign strategy.
OK, let's go straight over now to Brighton. There's Mr. Farron taking to the stage. He's only been leader for 1 year. This is his second address to conference, and he'll be hoping to reassure them and cut through to the wider public and give himself a bigger profile with voters in general.
Thank you very much.
He begins.
You may have worked this out for yourselves, but I am now the longest-serving leader of a UK-wide political party. I have seen off All the heavyweights. Cameron, Farage, Natalie Bennett, Roy Hodgson, Mel and Sue. Yeah. So Liberal Democrats are good at lots of things, but the thing it seems that we are best at is confounding expectations. We were expected to shy away from taking power, but we stepped up and we made a difference. We were expected to disappear after the 2015 election, but we bounced back. We are almost twice the size we were then. We've gained more council seats than every other party in this country put together. I've been doing a bit of confounding expectations myself. You see, I am a white, northern, working class, middle-aged bloke. According to the polling experts, I should have voted Leave. May I assure you that I didn't? But mates of mine did. People in my family did. You know, I've spent most of my adult life worked and raised a family in Westmoreland, and I am massively proud to call it my home. But I grew up a few miles south in Preston, in Lancashire. Preston's where I learnt my values. It's where I was raised in a loving family where there wasn't much money around, and at a time when it appeared to me that the Thatcher government seemed utterly determined to put every adult I knew out of work and on the scrap heap. But our people and our community, they were not for breaking. The great city of Preston is a no-nonsense place, proud of its history, ambitious about its future. It is the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution. It is the place where Cromwell won the most important battle in the English Civil War, the complacent establishment stuffed by the outsiders, which links rather neatly, I'm afraid, to the referendum. You see, Preston voted 53% to leave. Now, there were some places in Lancashire where 2/3 of people voted out. And I respect those people. If you will forgive me, they are my people. And if they'll forgive me, I am still utterly convinced that Britain should remain in Europe. I was convinced on the 23rd of June. I am today. I will continue to be, not because I am some starry-eyed pro-European with Ode to Joy as my ringtone. We all know what I have as my ringtone. But because I am a patriot and believe it's in our national interest to be in. For more jobs, for lower prices, to fight climate change, to stop terrorism, to catch criminals, to have influence, to be a good neighbour, to stand tall, to stand proud, to matter. And above all, because I believe that Britain is an open, tolerant and united country, the opposite of the bleak vision of Nigel Farage and Boris Johnson. Britain did not become Great Britain on fear, isolation and division, and there is no country called Little Britain. There is nothing so dangerous and narrow as nationalism and cheap identity politics. But there is nothing wrong with identity. I am very proud of mine. I am a Lancastrian. I am a Northerner. I am English. I am British. I am European. I am all of those things. None of them contradict one another, and no campaign of lies, hate, and fear will rob me of who I am. But we lost. We lost, didn't we? Now, I was born and raised in Preston, but the football mad half of my family is from Blackburn, so I am a Rovers fan. Thank you. Defeat and disappointment is in my blood. So, those who say I am a bad loser are quite wrong. I am a great loser. I have had loads of practice. But the referendum result to me was like a bereavement. I was devastated, I am devastated. We Liberal Democrats worked harder than anybody else in that campaign. We put blood, sweat and tears into it. We put the positive case for Europe while Cameron and Osborne churned out dry statistics, fear-mongering and shallow platitudes. It's easy to say, after such a narrow a referendum result, that we are a divided country. But in many ways we are, and the split between Leavers and Remainers is just a manifestation of that division. Britain today is far too unequal. There is too much excess and too much poverty, too much wealth concentrated in some parts of the country and too little in others. So, a couple of weeks after the referendum, I went back to Preston and we booked St Wilfrid's Church Hall just off Fishergate for a public meeting. Now, when my office booked the place, they had no idea that it actually meant something quite deeply to me personally. Because the last time I'd been in that church, I was there for my nan's funeral 10 years earlier. And the last time I'd walked out of it was as a pallbearer for her. So I was in what you might call a reflective mood when I began the meeting. Now, there were perhaps 70 or 80 people there. Most of them had voted to leave. And most of them pretty much fitted my demographic. They weren't mostly diehards. I reckon honestly that 3/4 of them could have been persuaded to vote Remain up until about 2 or 3 weeks out. One guy said that the clincher for him was George Osborne's punishment budget. And when he said that, pretty much the whole room chipped in and agreed with him. There was near universal acknowledgement that this had been the pivotal moment. Here was this guy, George Osborne, who they didn't really like and who they felt didn't really like them, and he'd appeared on the telly, bullying them into doing something they weren't sure they wanted to do, and they reacted. You see, if you base your political strategy on divide and rule, do not be surprised if the people you have divided decide to give you a kicking. So, I don't blame the people in that church hall for their anger. Actually, I share it. I am angry. And I am angry at the calculating forces of darkness who care nothing for the working people of this country, nothing for our NHS, nothing for those who struggle to get by, and who exploited that anger to win an exit from Europe that will hurt the poorest the hardest. The people in that church hall in Preston, they had voted differently to me, but I thought, you know what? We are on the same side here. We see a London-centric, Westminster and Whitehall-centric approach from politicians and the media, treating the provinces as alien curiosities. Those people in Preston, Sunderland, Newport, they see a divide between those who win and those who lose. When the country is booming, they do not see the benefit. And when the country is in decline, they are the first to be hit. At that meeting, they talked about low wages, about poor housing, about strains on hospitals and schools. Their problems weren't caused by the European Union. They were caused by powerful people who took them for granted, by politicians who have spent decades chasing cheap headlines and short-term success for their own political careers and never acting in the long-term interests of the whole country. So those people in that room, like millions of others, wanted, quite understandably, to give the powerful a kicking, so they did. Now, I wanted Britain to remain in the European Union, and I still do, but we have got to listen, to learn and to understand why millions of people voted to leave. We can't just tell them they're wrong and stick our fingers in our ears. So I want to do two things. I want to persuade those who voted leave that we understand and respect their reasons, that we are determined to take head-on the things about today's Britain that have left so many people feeling ignored. And I want to give them their say over what comes next. So, Theresa May says Brexit means Brexit. Well, thanks for clearing that up. Absolute genius. Nearly 3 months since the referendum, and we have a government with new departments, new titles, a new Prime Minister, but no plan, no vision, no clue, and no leadership. Theresa May did so little in the Remain campaign that she actually made it look like Jeremy Corbyn pulled the shift. And today, the absence of leadership from the Prime Minister is astonishing. The absence of clarity as to what will happen to our country is a disgrace. 3 months on, it is not good enough to have brainstorming sessions at Chequers while investment and jobs steadily bleed away, while our standing and relevance in the world diminishes in direct proportion to the number of foreign visits by Boris Johnson, while British industry is crying out for direction, for certainty, for any idea of what lies ahead. Make no mistake, the Conservative Party has now lost the right to call itself the party of business. It has lost the right to call itself the party of the free market. The Conservative Party no longer supports business, no longer understands the need for calm economic pragmatism, but instead pursues the nationalist, protectionist fantasies of the Brexit fundamentalists who have won the day indeed. My message to any business in this country, large or small, is this. If you are backing today's Conservative Party, you are funding your own funeral. There is now only one party that believes in British business, large and small, that believes in entrepreneurship and innovation. That is the Liberal Democrats. We are the free market, free trade, pro-business party now. So, Theresa May, please tell us what Brexit really means. You have had 3 months. You are the Prime Minister. Stop dithering. What is your plan? The Liberal Democrats have a plan. We know what we want and we know where we want to take our country. When Theresa May does agree a deal with the European Union, we want the people to decide. Not a rerun of the referendum, not a second referendum, but a referendum on the terms of the as-yet unknown Brexit deal. And if the Tories say, we've had enough referendums, I say, you started it. We had a democratic vote in June. We cannot start this process with democracy and end it with a stitch-up. If we trusted the people to vote for our departure, then we must trust the people to vote for our destination. Millions of people have not been well served by generations of politicians who put their own short-term political needs before the long-term interests of the people they were supposed to be serving, and politics is about service. David Cameron's handling of our relationship with Europe is a masterclass in selfish, shallow short-termism, party before country at every turn. The Conservatives risked our country's very future, the life chances of millions of our young people, all in a failed attempt to unite their fractured party. David Cameron risked our future and he lost. And while he waltzes off to riches and retirement, our country is plunged into economic uncertainty, insecurity and irrelevance on the world stage. The Tories took the gamble, but Britain will pay the price. What an absolute disgrace. But their short-termism does not stop with Brexit. Look at their handling of the refugee crisis. The biggest crisis facing our continent since the Second World War. They did nothing to help right until the point that they thought it was in their short-term interest to act. When the photo of the body of 3-year-old Alan Kurdi face down in the sand was on the front page of every newspaper. The people were shocked, heartbroken. They demanded action, and the Tories did the bare minimum. But since then, the front pages have moved on, and they have barely lifted a finger. Now, there are some on the centre-left who are squeamish about patriotism, but not me. I am proud of my country, and I hate it when my government makes me ashamed. When I was on the island of Lesbos last year, after we'd helped to land a flimsy boat of desperate refugees, I was handing out bottles of fresh water alongside other volunteers. And a few yards away was an aid worker from New Zealand who knew that I was a British politician. And she looked at me and she shouted, stop handing out bottles of water and take some effing refugees, because that is how Britain is seen, mean and not pulling its weight. And maybe that doesn't bother some people, but it bothers me, because I am proud of who we are. I am proud of who we are. I am proud of Britain. We are always a sanctuary for the desperate, the abused and the persecuted. And I will not stand by and watch my country become smaller, meaner and more selfish. That is not Britain. We are better than that. And a year on, the crisis is worse. It is not better, not that you would ever know it. We don't see those desperate families in the media every day now. We aren't confronted so often with the knowledge that they are just like us and that they need our help. Much to the government's delight, compassion fatigue has set in, the news has moved on. We've had Brexit, a new Prime Minister, a Labour leadership contest, and none of that makes a blind bit of difference to a 9-year-old kid stuck alone and hungry and cold in a camp in northern Greece, or to the family this morning fleeing their burning camp in Moria. The government wants us to forget this crisis. It's too difficult to solve, too risky to take a lead, but we have not forgotten. We will not forget. Those children could be our children. How dare the government abandon them? But short-termism in politics goes back a lot further than just this government. You've got to look at the way the Conservatives in the 80s and Labour in the 90s treated the banks. Sucking up, deregulating, encouraging a culture of risk and greed. Instead of building an economy that served the long-term needs of the whole country, they put all their eggs in one basket, the banks. And for a while, well, things were good for Britain. Britain boomed. But they didn't invest in modern infrastructure that could benefit the north of England, or Scotland, or Wales, or the Midlands, or the Southwest. They didn't invest in the skills the next generation would need. They didn't invest in our manufacturing base. All they did was allow the banks to take bigger and bigger risks, build up bigger and bigger liabilities, and when the banks failed, we were all left paying the price. In lost jobs, in lower wages, in debt, in cuts to public services. Short-term thinking, long-term consequences. And nowhere is this danger posed more by short-term thinking greater than with the future of our National Health Service. Can you remember a time when there were not reports on the news almost daily saying the National Health Service was in crisis? For years, politicians have chosen to paper over the cracks rather than come clean about what it will really take, what it will really cost. Not just to keep the NHS afloat, but to give people the care and the treatment that they deserve. And that means, finally, bringing the NHS and social care together. In my grandpa's journey through Alzheimer's, he had good care in the home he spent his last couple of years in. But when he first became ill, after the death of my grandma, the place he was put in was despicable. Lonely, unclean, uncaring. I can still smell it now. It's a few years back, but as I fought to get him out of that place and into somewhere better, it occurred to me that this was a standard experience for too many older people and for their loved ones. And maybe some people can just shrug and accept this, but I can't. I've seen enough terrible old people's homes, and I've seen enough people who've had to wait forever for treatment, particularly people who don't have someone to fight their corner. It is not civilized to let people slip through the net. It is not civilized towards the people who love them, who go out of their way to try and make their lives easier when everything else is making their lives harder. It is not civilized, and it is not good enough. I worry about this, not just for the NHS in general, but if I'm honest, for myself and for my family. We are, if we're all lucky, going to grow old. We all deserve to know that no matter what happens, we will be cared for properly and treated with dignity and respect. Now, if the great liberal William Beveridge had written his blueprint today when the people are living to the ages they are now, there is no doubt that he would have proposed a national health and care service. He would have been appalled about the child who has to look after their disabled parent, or the hundreds of thousands of women across the country who are unable to work because they are disproportionately the caregivers. So let's today decide to do what Beveridge would do. Let's create that national health and care service. And let's stop being complacent about our NHS. Of course, we have a brilliant NHS, best staff in the world, free care at the point of access, but we are spending far less on it every year than we need to. Of the 15 original EU countries, including Spain, Greece, and Portugal, we rank behind them in 13th place when it comes to health spending. It would take tens of billions of pounds a year just to bring ourselves up to their average, and it is not good enough. So we need to face the truth, the hard truth, that the NHS needs more money, a lot more money, not just to stop it lurching from crisis to crisis, but so that it can meet the needs and the challenges it will face in the years ahead, so that it can be the service we all need for the long term. Now, that means having the most frank and honest conversation about the NHS that the country has ever had. What Beveridge did for the 20th century, we must do for the 21st century. And in Norman Lamb, we have the politician who is most trusted and respected by the health profession, and deservedly so. And Norman and I are clear. We are not going to join the ranks of those politicians who are too scared of losing votes to face up to what really needs to be done. We will go to the British people with the results of our Beveridge Commission, and we will offer a new deal for health and social care, honest about the cost, bold about the solution, and if the only way to fund a health service that meets the needs of everyone is to raise taxes, Liberal Democrats will raise taxes. Short-term thinking is the scourge of our education system too. Governments have designed an education system, especially at primary school level, that is focused not on developing young people for later life, for work or for further study, but on getting them through the wrong kinds of tests. It's not about whether kids can solve problems or converse in other languages or even their own. It's about statistics, measurements, league tables. Instead of building an education system, we have built a quality assurance industry. It is no wonder so many teachers are frustrated. No wonder so many leave the profession. Parents deserve to know that their child's teacher is focused on teaching. Teachers are professionally undervalued, driven towards meeting targets instead of developing young minds. And as ever, it is the poorest kids who suffer the most. So in the last government, we introduced a policy, a long-term policy, to try and help the poorest kids keep up with their better-off classmates, the pupil premium. And this year, this school year, more than 2 million children will benefit from that Liberal Democrat policy. And I am so proud. I am so proud of that, and I am so proud of Kirsty Williams, who is making a real difference every day to the lives of children across Wales. The pupil premium is not safe in Tory hands, but it is safe in Kirsty's. And what's more, she has doubled it. That is what happens when you get into power. But we need to do so very much more. I talk a lot about opportunity, about breaking down the barriers that hold people back, and nowhere is that more important than in education. I want our schools to be places where our teachers have the freedom to use their skill and their knowledge to open young minds, not just train them to pass tests. I want them to be places where children are inspired to learn, not stressed out by those tests. So I want to end the current system of SATs in primary schools that are a distraction from the real education that professional teachers want to give their children, that weigh heavily on children as young as 6 and add nothing to the breadth of their learning. What are we doing? Wasting our children's education and wasting the teachers' talents on ticking boxes. And what are we doing? In 2016, threatening to relegate 80% of our children to education's second division by returning to the 11+. I mean, every child wants to send their kids to a good school. Every parent wants their kid, do you know what I mean? Every child wants their parent to be sent to school. I think that's probably right in my case. But every parent thinks the same too. But, you know, selective schools are not the answer for either of us. We need better schools for all our children, not just those who can pass an exam at the age of 11. We can't just leave children behind. Over the last 40 years, millions of children, me included back in the day, have been liberated by comprehensive education. And would those kids, probably including me, would have been consigned to second-class status in a secondary modern. And it is important for us to remember who made that happen. It was Shirley Williams. It was Shirley Williams. So let's be clear. Let us be very clear. For us, defending education for all is not just about being liberal, it is personal. Shirley, we will defend your legacy. I mean, assessment is vital. Exams are actually important, but let's have assessment that leads to a love of learning and a breadth of learning that is relevant to what children will need next at school and in their future as adults. There is nothing more long-term than the education of a child that stays with them for their entire life. So let's end the box ticking. Let's teach our children and let's trust our teachers. Now, one thing you cannot accuse Jeremy Corbyn of is short-term thinking. His lot have waited over 100 years for this. Finally, they have taken over the Labour Party. And like all good Marxists, they have seized the means of production. They've even seized the nurseries too, opening branches of Momentum Kids, otherwise known as child labour, or my particular favourite, Tiny Trots. So, I mean, we shouldn't laugh. The Liberal Democrats have never had any trouble with entryists. unless you include the Quakers. I mean, my problem with Jeremy Corbyn is nothing personal. After all, I used to see him quite a lot. In the Blair years, he was always in our lobby. But my problem with Corbyn is that for him, holding the government to account is not a priority. Winning elections is a bourgeois distraction unless it's his own leadership election. It's baffling to see the Labour Party arguing about whether or not they should even be trying to win an election. Can you imagine that? The Liberals and Liberal Democrats spent decades out of power, and then, when the opportunity finally came in incredibly difficult circumstances, when the easiest thing in the world would have been to walk away, we chose to take power because we knew the point of politics is to put principles into action, to get things done, not just to feel good, but to do good. So we took power and we got crushed. So you could forgive us. You could forgive us for thinking twice about whether power is really worth it. But of course it's worth it. Having fine principles but no power is just turning your backs on the people who need you the most. It's letting someone else win the day. We have huge crises in Britain today. In our NHS, in our economy, in our relationship with the rest of the world, we have a government, a Tory government, that got the support of less than a quarter of the electorate at the last election, led by a Prime Minister who nobody elected, that has plunged our country into chaos. They spent a year going for the working poor, refugees, and junior doctors. And what have the Labour Party been doing? Going for each other. Instead of standing up to the Conservatives, they were sitting on the floor of half-empty Virgin trains. Because maybe Jeremy Corbyn thinks there are more important things than winning elections, but for millions of people desperate for an affordable home, for a fair wage, for a properly funded NHS, they cannot wait. How dare the official opposition abandon them? Whichever party you supported at the last election, we all know that Britain needs a decent, united opposition. So if Corbyn's Labour has left the stage, then we will take the stage. People say to me, this is a great opportunity for the Liberal Democrats, but this is more than opportunity, it is duty. Britain needs a strong opposition. The Liberal Democrats will be that strong opposition. Do you ever listen to these Labour people arguing amongst themselves, throwing around the word Blairite as if it's the world's most offensive insult? I even hear some of the Momentum folks referring to Gordon Brown as a Blairite. I'm pretty sure he's a Brownite. So, just to reassure you, I am not a Blairite. I was proud, very proud, to march against his illegal invasion of Iraq. I was proud to stand with Charles Kennedy. And I was incredibly proud just this summer when Charles' brave stance was vindicated in the Chilcot Report. I was also proud to be in the party that stood up against his government's attempts to stamp on our civil liberties, from compulsory ID cards to 90 days detention without charge. And I was proud of Vince Cable as he called out Tony Blair's government's deregulation of the banks. But there is more. There is more to Tony Blair's legacy than that. You see, I kind of see Tony Blair the way I see the Stone Roses. I preferred the early work. Tony Blair's government gave us the national minimum wage. It gave us working tax credits. It gave us NHS investment and a massive school building programme. I disagree with him a lot, but I will not criticise him for those things. I admire him for those things. And I respect him for believing that the point of being in politics is to get stuff done. And you can only get stuff done if you win. Otherwise, you're letting your opponent to get stuff done instead. Now, the crowd in Corbyn's ranks like to talk in terms of loyalty and betrayal, where there is no surer way to betray the people you represent than to let your opponents win. So I believe in working across party lines. I'm prepared to work with people of all parties and none if it will make people's lives better. But I couldn't work with Jeremy Corbyn because Jeremy Corbyn would never work with me. I wanted to work with him during the referendum campaign, but he wouldn't share a platform. Splendid isolation was more important to him than joining the fight to save our country. Well, Labour is having its leadership contest in a few days' time. Maybe Jeremy Corbyn will not be their leader, in which case it will be Owen Smith. Now, I don't know Owen Smith all that well. But unlike Jeremy Corbyn, he is certainly on our side of the European debate. So if Owen Smith wins, I want to make it very clear, I am open to working together. And there are others I could work with too. There is another contest happening now. You might have noticed this. It's for the chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee. It is an important post, but with no offence, let's face it, it's kind of a retirement job. Among the contenders are Yvette Cooper, Caroline Flint, and Chuka Umunna. These are Premier League people. Shouldn't that be Labour's leadership contest? What are these people doing, jostling for position in a sideshow? They should be centre stage. The government needs an opposition, and that means progressives should be prepared to put our differences aside in order to hold them to account. But if Jeremy Corbyn does win, where does that leave us? A Conservative Brexit government that without us to restrain them are showing their true colours. Reckless, divisive, uncaring, prepared to risk our future prosperity for their own short-term gain. And a Labour Party that has forgotten the people it is there to stand up for. Hopelessly divided, patently unfit for government with no plan for the economy or their country. Led by a man who is obsessed with refighting the battles of the past and ignoring the damage this government is doing to our future. And there is a hole, therefore, in the centre of British politics right now, a huge opportunity for a party that will stand up for an open, tolerant and united Britain. There is a hole in the centre of British politics right now for a rallying point for people who believe in the politics of reason, of evidence, of moderation, who want facts, not fear, who want responsibility, not recklessness, who want to believe that someone is looking out for the long-term good of our country. There is a hole in the centre of British politics right now that is crying out to be filled by a real opposition. So we will stand up to the Conservative Brexit government. If Labour won't be the opposition Britain needs, then we will. And that is what we are fighting for. A Britain that is open, tolerant, and united. And we will only build that Britain if we win. So here is my plan. We will dramatically rebuild our strength in local government, deliberately, passionately, effectively. Winning council seat is our chance to shape, lead, and serve our communities, to put liberalism into practice. Liberals believe in local government. I believe in local government. Every council seat matters to me. So my challenge to you is to pick a ward and win it. And my commitment to you is that I choose to build our party's revival on victories in every council in this country. And my plan includes continuing to grow our membership. Our party has grown up 80% in just 14 months, but that is merely a staging post. We will continue to build a movement that can win at every level. I will lead the Liberal Democrats as the only party committed to Britain in Europe, with a plan to let the people decide our future in a referendum on the as-yet non-existent Tory Brexit deal. I will lead the only party with a plan for our country's long-term future. Green, healthy, well-educated, outward-looking, prosperous, secure. I will build the open, tolerant, united party that can be the opposition to this Conservative government on NHS underfunding, on divisive grammar schools, on its attacks on British business. I want the Liberal Democrats to be ready to fill the gap where an official opposition should be. I want the Liberal Democrats to be the strong, united opposition. I want us to be audacious, ambitious, and accept the call of history. A century ago, the Liberals lost touch with their purpose and their voters, and Labour took their chance and became Britain's largest progressive party. Today, I want us utterly ready and determined to take our chance as the tectonic plates shift again. I did not accept the leadership of our party so that we could look on from the sidelines. I did it because our destiny is to once again become one of the great parties of government, to be the place where Liberals and progressives of all kinds gather to provide the strong opposition that this country needs. That is my plan. I need you to join me to fight for it. So let's be clear. Let's be clear. We are talking about doing a Trudeau. Now, he's better looking than me, and he's got a tattoo. I can fix one of those things if you insist. I would not get into a boxing ring with him, but I reckon I could have him in a fell race. But the point is, Trudeau's Liberals leapt over an inadequate official opposition to defeat a right-wing Conservative government. Do you fancy doing that? Because I do. Because I do. And you know what? There are some people who will say, you know, steady on, you've only got 8 MPs. Well, look, maybe for the time being, some might be sceptical about us doing a Trudeau, but let's definitely agree that we can do an Ashdown to take this party from a handful of seats to dozens of seats, from the fringe to the centre, from irrelevance to importance. But what would doing an Ashdown mean for Britain today? Well, look, no one believes, whether boundary changes happen or not, that Labour will gain a single seat from the Tories. Mathematically, the SNP could only possibly take 1 seat off the Tories. But there are dozens of Tory seats in our reach, which means that the only thing standing between the Conservatives and a majority at the next election is the revival of the Liberal Democrats, so let's make it happen. And we have to make it happen, because there is a new battle emerging here and across the whole Western world between the forces of tolerant liberalism and intolerant, closed-minded nationalism. Of all the things that depressed me the morning after the referendum was seeing Nigel Farage celebrating. That really took the biscuit. Here is a man who fought a campaign that pandered to our worst instincts, fear, anxiety, suspicion of others. And he is not alone. His victory was welcomed by Marine Le Pen in France, Golden Dawn in Greece, and nationalists and populists all across Europe. And in a few weeks, he went from standing in front of that odious Breaking Point poster, demonising desperate refugees, to standing on a podium in Mississippi next to Donald Trump. And make no mistake, Farage's victory is becoming the government's agenda. When the government talk about a hard Brexit, that is what they mean, a Brexit that cuts us off from our neighbours, no matter what the consequences for people's jobs and livelihoods. A Brexit that toys with the lives of hard-working people who have made Britain their home, paid their way, immersed themselves in our communities. Just more than 1 million Brits have made their homes on the continent too. A Brexit that will leave us poorer, weaker, and less able to protect ourselves, but we will not let Nigel Farage's vision for Britain win. To coin a phrase, I want my country back. to people who support Labour, who look at the last election result and say, can I really take the risk of backing the Liberal Democrats? Let me be blunt with you. The risk is for you to do nothing. In 20 years' time, we're going to all be asked by our kids when our NHS, our school system, our unity as a country has been impoverished by 20-odd years of Tory rule, and when our economy has been relegated, our green industries trashed, and our status diminished after 2 decades of isolation from Europe, we're going to be asked, why did you let that happen? What did you do to try and stop it? And you might explain, well, we lost the referendum, so we had to move on and live with it. Or you might explain, well, I was in the Labour Party. Momentum destroyed it, but I couldn't bring myself to leave and back anybody else. And they will look at you and they will say, why didn't you even try? Why did you let us limp out of Europe? Why did you stick with a party that handed the Conservatives unlimited power? And you will know then that you could have done something different. You could have joined us. You could have fought back. You could have taken a risk. Because joining the Liberal Democrats today, it is a risk. It is a big ask, but let me be very clear. As we stand on the edge of those 2 horrific realities, Brexit and a Tory stranglehold on Britain, the biggest risk is that you don't join us. So let's be absolutely certain of this reality. The only movement with the desire and the potential to stop the calamity of Brexit and the tragedy of a generation of Conservative majority rule is this movement. It is the Liberal Democrats. So you can despair if you want and accept the inevitability of a Tory government for the next quarter of a century, or you can recognise that the Liberal Democrats can prevent that inevitability. That means you, it means us, together. Together, we must fight to keep Britain open, tolerant and united. Together, the Liberal Democrats must be the real voice of opposition. Together, we must win. Thank you.
Tim Farron finishes his second address as leader to the Liberal Democrats annual conference. He spoke for just over 45 minutes, under 50. He said he was convinced that despite the referendum, the UK should stay in the EU. He felt a sense of bereavement when the results of the referendum on the 23rd came through. He wants another referendum once and if a deal is done. And if he says that we've got too many referendums, or if the Tories claim that, his answer is, well, you started it, he says to the Tories. There was a particular passionate part of his speech when he spoke about his experience on the island of Lesbos in Greece as the Syrian refugees were being washed ashore. And although he didn't have a policy to respond to that, there was a clear implication that Britain should be doing more, in particular taking in more child refugees fleeing Syria. Big chunk of the speech on the National Health Service. Indeed, he wants a National Health and Care Service. Yet to work out how to pay for that, but it's a work in progress, and they're looking at various ways of taxing it. He's making his way through the hall now, getting applause from the party faithful and the odd hug. I'd said earlier that nobody wants to hug Mr. Farron, but of course that's only true outside the LibDem hall. Plenty of the faithful happy to hug him. He said at one stage that the LibDems were a free market party, which raised a few eyebrows. Nobody's quite sure what that means. He also said that this was a country in chaos. Again, it's not exactly quite clear what he means by chaos. He did say, probably in a pitch to moderate Labour voters or even MPs, that although he had been against Tony Blair on the Iraq War and some other things, he admired a number of the domestic reforms that Mr. Blair had done. And indeed was quite effusive in his praise for Tony Blair as regards that. Probably the only time Mr. Blair will get any praise in this party conference season of 2016. He said he wanted to work with other parties, but he had attempted that during the referendum, and Mr. Corbyn had pushed him aside, couldn't find time to meet him. He talked about doing a Trudeau, by which he means that you come from being a third party, you overleap the opposition, and you go straight into being a party of government, which is what Trudeau's Canadian Liberals have done. Of course, the Canadian Liberals have a long experience in modern times of forming majority governments, which is not the case for the Liberal Democrats in modern times. He then went out to target a number of Tory seats. He seemed to think that the lowest hanging fruit were in seats currently held by the Tories. Polly is still with her. What did you make of all that?
I thought you got a really strong sense of Tim as a human being. You know, he's a really nice guy. He was filled with emotion when he was talking about refugees. We heard a lot about his background, growing up in Preston, in Lancashire, and about his nan, about his grandpa. And he was clearly trying to communicate the sense that he's somebody you can trust. He's somebody who's very, very likeable. And, you know, that's pretty absent, actually, amongst the other parties' leaderships.
He also went out of his way to say that he understood. He talked about going to this church in Preston where most of the people there had voted to leave the European Union. And he understood, and he wanted, although he didn't agree with them on that, he wanted to speak more for them. But it wasn't quite clear in which way he would do that.
Well, there's an identity politics here that he is trying to communicate with those groups with. He is a white working class northern bloke, and he, you know, is really trying to build that narrative. He's trying to pull together a coalition here. As you said, he's talked about being a free market leader, trying to pull people who are disappointed by the Conservatives having you know, now in the end backing Brexit away from the Conservative Party, trying to draw people away from the Labour Party by talking about how much he respects some of the Blair legacy, and then also trying to reach into that kind of working class northern vote, the great disenfranchised people who we know backed Brexit. So he's identified a coalition of people that, if he can unite them, could be a powerful electoral force.
But it involves that old LibDem trick of trying to face both ways at once. That you are trying to get disillusioned working class northern voters, probably Labour voters. You're going to try and get Tory votes to win Tory seats. So you mentioned the free market, you mentioned the national health, to try and get the northern Labour votes, and you're going to try and get other Labour votes in the south. You're facing a number of ways. I mean, he talked about the need for a national health and care service, and that would involve more tax, which is fine. But then he talks about being a free market party. What position did he take today that was free market?
Well, he talked about the importance of free trade and the importance of remaining open to the European Union and to other countries and making sure that we are able to grow as an economy.
But that's it, just free trade?
Well, I mean, that's, I think, the most relevant question when we're thinking about economic growth at the moment. Given the context of Brexit, it makes sense to talk about our stance on trade.
Are the Lib Dems in favour of the TTIP deal with North America, with the United States?
I think it's a complicated deal. It's clearly very much on the rocks. Lots of Liberal Democrats have backed it, though we have also talked about the need for scrutiny and a lot of detailed things, including, protection for the NHS to make sure that our, taxpayer-funded NHS isn't threatened.
This comparison with the Canadian Liberals and with Mr. Trudeau, if you know anything about Canadian politics, it doesn't hold, does it?
Well, I'm married to a Canadian, as it happens, so I know a bit about Canadian politics.
You will know it doesn't hold then.
Tim's right that he's not Justin Trudeau, though Joe and I were discussing whether Justin Trudeau is in fact handsome or not. He's not really to my taste.
That's not really the issue. What I was meaning was Trudeau, first of all, is a very famous name in Canadian politics. Mr. Trudeau's, which Mr. Farron is not, Trudeau's party had been in power for big chunks of the post-war period. It was one of the major parties of government or of opposition. That's not true of the Liberal Democrats. It is true the Mr. Trudeau's party went into some bad times, but nothing like the bad times that the Lib Dems faced. They went down to 8 seats. So, as I say, if you know anything about Canadian politics, the comparison doesn't hold up.
Well, I think, as Tim said in his speech, he knows that that's incredibly ambitious. It's possible that the dice will fall that way and there will be the opportunity for a complete reversal.
Under what circumstances would that happen?
never say never in British politics. I never thought that Brexit could happen. But and look at what happened to Labour in Scotland. I think it's pretty surprising to have seen an entirely Labour-dominated political system in Scotland completely replaced by the SNP in a way that lots of people thought was impossible.
So the Liberal Democrats are going to replace the Conservatives in the same way as the SNP has replaced Labour?
I'm saying there's opportunities for the Liberal Democrats to grow, but let's be clear, what Tim said was he knows that the Trudeau model is ambitious, and what he's looking for is steady growth like Ashdown, perhaps doubling or trebling our representation at the next election, and then hoping to grow from there.
He was very passionate, as I said, about the Syrian refugees, particularly the child refugees, and he thinks we should do more. But do we have any idea what his policy on immigration is?
Well, he's been really clear about wanting to remain in the European Union, remaining open to free movement of labour from Europe, and to being very open to refugees, wanting to open our...
But refugees, as you all know, is not an immigration policy. If they're refugees, that's a different category. There's a certain moral and legal obligations on refugees, which I think is what he was saying we should meet. But on immigration, do we know what the Lib Dem policy is?
Well, as I've said, on Europe, I think it's pretty clear that the Liberal Democrats would continue to back free movement of people.
So no change there?
No change there.
Okay.
And when it comes to...
And on non-EU?
On non-EU migrants, Lib Dems have looked closely at some of the details of the policies the Conservatives have implemented, including, for example, on allowing spouses to come and considered that those are, in fact, too draconian. And certainly if they're replicated for EU migrants in a Brexit environment where free labour is ended, they could be incredibly damaging to
So
our
more
NHS.
liberal on non-EU immigration than currently?
Potentially, yeah.
So just to finish up on this, since he said he wanted to speak particularly for the people in this church, which he seemed to be implying were northern working class people who had voted against the EU, or for whom immigration is a huge issue, his response in speaking for them is to continue with the existing EU immigration policy of free movement and to be more liberal than we currently are on non-EU immigration. In what way is that speaking for them?
I think lots of the concern about immigration is associated with pressure on public services when you talk to people about it. And Tim's making this big pitch for major investment in our NHS.
So not changing the numbers. The numbers could actually grow.
No, but making sure that the public services grow to meet demand in a way that I think they haven't been able to.
OK.
Let's get some more reaction from Brighton following Tim Farron's speech from the Lib Dem President, Sal Brinton. Hello, Sal Brinton. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Give us your thoughts on the speech.
Hi, Joe. It was inspirational. Tim has actually found a really strong voice about the role of the Liberal Democrats in the future, the place of the Liberal Democrats in politics today, and absolutely being clear that as Labour leave the place of opposition and the centre ground, that's exactly the place that we are going to take.
Right. I mean, what makes you or Tim Farron think that the Liberal Democrats can be the official opposition with just 8 MPs?
Because our 8 MPs are pulling an enormous amount of weight, and the real problem, Joe, is not what we are doing, but people like Norman Lamb are making a considerable impact. And for example, he is well respected on NHS issues throughout Parliament and throughout the wider world. It's about Labour abdicating their responsibility. There is a vacuum, and Tim is saying we may be few in number in the Commons, we are much larger in the country, and we are going to step up to that challenge.
Right, and who's listening to you?
We're going to get our...
But who's listening to you? Which voters are actually listening to you? In what way is Tim Farron actually cutting through to the wider public?
We're beginning to see that already with by-election victories, with the increase in membership since the referendum, with people making it very clear that they've come to Tim and the Liberal Democrats because we are open, we are pro-European, we are tolerant, and what's more, we are probably the only united party around at the moment.
Although Labour can boast the same sort of increase in numbers, if not more, in terms of membership. How long do you think it would take for you to get back to the position you were in terms of numbers of MPs pre-2015?
Anything is possible at the future election.
Of course,
with
anything
the
is possible.
Earthquake that's going on. And I think Tim was making the point, you know, we're not going to jump straight back up into the high 60s, but we can look at dozens and possibly more if other parties fracture. And more importantly,
by 2020.
If, as Tim says, we are going to, Joe, if we are the only party who is going to be fighting for investment in the NHS, for tackling this real problem about the division between health and social care that is absolutely dire at the moment, nobody else is stepping into that field. We've been talking about investment. Norman Lamb's commission is absolutely going to give a clear agenda about how it's going to happen. The Liberal Democrats are leading it, and we will, if necessary, show where the extra investment's got to come to make that happen.
Right, and you think
that's too precious to
you
lose.
think that
the Liberal
policy,
Democrats know that's a major issue for members of the public. That's
right.
Constantly coming back in polling. The current state of the NHS is absolutely vital to most voters, and
right.
we are the only people who have a plan.
OK, and you've got evidence to show that the public is in favour, broadly in favour of paying higher taxes. Norman Lamb couldn't give me the exact figure, but certainly above a penny on national insurance to pay for that extra investment.
One of the reasons that Norman couldn't give an exact figure is because the Commission hasn't concluded its work. Once that's been done, what we're saying is, if it requires extra investment, and if that has to come through taxation, we believe as Liberal Democrats we need to make that investment. And what's more, we actually hear from an awful lot of people that they would be prepared to pay a bit more in income tax to save the NHS.
Right, and I mean, Tim Farron said in his speech that we are the free market, free trade, pro-business party now. Are you advocating a free market in the NHS as well?
No, absolutely not. Not in the sense that the Conservatives mean. The free market was very much Tim talking about the single market. One of the great concerns that the business world has had since the referendum has been the Conservatives just walking away from the interests of business and the market in this country. It's very interesting that a senior businesswoman, Nicola Horlick, has joined the Liberal Democrats following Liam Fox's comments about business people being fat and lazy.
Right.
It's absolutely outrageous to have a Conservative Party talking about that. We are very clear that Britain's businesses have benefited enormously from the single market. They already trade well elsewhere in the world, and we will continue to support them doing that.
Right. So
we recognise the importance to business that we continue that trade in the European Union.
OK, well, you say that you're the pro-business party, and Tim Farron said that the Prime Minister and the Conservative government has plunged our country into chaos. Where is that chaos? What's the chaos?
The chaos of, are we going to have a single market or not? Are we going to have free movement of labour or not?
That's not chaos, that's a discussion.
Absolutely. No, it is chaos. We have large international firms saying they're not sure if there is a single market, that they want to retain their European headquarters in the UK. Japanese car manufacturers. Some firms in the city already extremely concerned and talking about moving.
OK.
That's chaos. It's happening now.
Right. What is that chaos, though, in terms of economic figures? Sal Brindle, in terms of figures, in terms of economic data, how is that chaos manifesting itself?
It's too early for economic data. It is only just 3 months since we left. However, we're beginning to get employment data and productivity data. The moment you have large manufacturing industry saying, if Britain is going to remove itself from Europe, we are going to move our European HQ from Britain into Europe, that is going to mean that we are likely to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs in this country. Obviously, until the manufacturers see exactly what the Brexit plans are from the government, but they are beginning to warn us there is a problem.
Right.
We are the only party that is still fighting for the single market and for us to have a place in it, because it's vital for our own businesses and it's vital for foreign businesses that are based here to have access to that European market.
Right, and then interestingly, Tim Farron said that it was the referendum and the Conservative short-termism that has landed the country in the chaos that he talked about. And yet you want another referendum. You want a second referendum, despite the fact that you think they're now a bad idea.
Well, part of the problem with the last referendum was that there was no detail on what was exactly going to happen. And as we know, there were a lot of untruths and a lot of things that were absolutely nothing to do with the referendum used by the Leave campaign. Yes, people voted to leave, and Tim and the Liberal Democrats are very clear we don't want to rerun that referendum. We've agreed as a country to get onto the train to depart. What we don't yet have is a destination.
All right.
Tim is right that the detail of that destination is absolutely critical. And it may be that there are a large number of people in this country who say the cost is too high if we lose hundreds of thousands of jobs because we are going to lose the single market.
All right.
But we don't know because Theresa May will not tell us.
Sal Brinton in Brighton. Thank you.
Big day for the Liberal Democrats in Brighton, even bigger day in New York taking place, where the United Nations and the world's leaders are gathered for their annual September shindig. President Obama is, as we speak, making his final address as President of the United States to the UN General Assembly. And our own Prime Minister, Theresa May, is also going to be speaking for the first time to the United Nations. The BBC's deputy political editor, John Pienaar, is over there. He's outside the UN. You see all the flags outside the General Assembly building. John, bring us up to date over what's happening.
Well, the Prime Minister in a couple of hours' time, Andrew, is going to be on the floor of the UN General Assembly making her debut speech there, and the message of that speech is going to be the message that's being pressed home in meeting after meeting with President and Prime Minister after President and Prime Minister. Those are going on now. It's sort of diplomatic speed dating, and the thrust of all of this is the Prime Minister coming here to tell world leaders that because Britain's leaving the European Union doesn't mean that Britain's giving up its role as a global player. There's Britain, still with its meeting its targets for international aid, still meeting its targets for spending on defence. It is still very much in the business of international cooperation and playing a role as a big global player. But of course the question mark as to how exactly that carries on after Brexit, that's the one that's on everybody's mind.
I'm sure there must be a great interest among global leaders and their advisors around them over what Brexit will actually mean, and they'll be asking Mrs May about that. But I suppose that she's not been able to tell us, and I assume therefore she hasn't really got much more or much new to tell them.
Well, she may have an idea of where this is going, but she can't know. This is going to be hammered out, of course, Andrew, over countless meetings with other leaders at prime ministerial level, at cabinet level, at official level, endless meetings at that level between any number of countries, not just the European Union, on how trading relationships are going to work in future. And it's a horse trading game, and so there'll be give and take, and that's barely even begun. What we do know at this stage is it's not going to be easy. We also know that there are those voices, quite powerful voices in the European Union, who think it shouldn't be made easier. In fact, it should be made as hard as possible. You've got the Slovakian leader, Robert Fico, who was saying it should be painful for Britain, effectively, to send the message across the European Union. If you're thinking of leaving, just bear in mind, guys, it's cold out there. Now, when this was put to the Prime Minister on the flight over into New York, when the Prime Minister comes to the back of the plane into the cheap seats and we sort of cluster around, that was put to her, and she was simply saying she's going to get a deal, they will all sign. Well, of course she hopes so, but we don't know what that deal is going to be like, whatever idea may be in Theresa May's mind. There's a lot of haggling to go.
Now, the theme of this particular General Assembly, I think, has a lot to do with the number of refugees in the world, with the displaced peoples, the fact there are millions of people on the move in various parts of the world, not least in the Middle East and heading through Greece and into Italy. But Mrs May's message on that is quite, how could I put it, unsympathetic?
Well, no, I wouldn't say necessarily unsympathetic, but there was something of a lesson about what Theresa May was saying when she was addressing the wider world and setting down the way that she sees the migration crisis. For one thing, asserting that every country, including Britain, of course, has got a right to police and control its own border. That was almost like saying, look, hands off, we will deal with our borders, don't you tell us who to let in and on what terms. Also telling them, look, it's a very serious crisis, they don't need to be told that very much. 65 million people displaced from their homes, Andrew, that's more than the population of the United Kingdom. A lot of the countries out there, including Germany and many others, they're feeling really the sharp end of all of this, and Theresa May is telling them, yes, we have to work together, so let's get together some kind of plan, but maybe, among other things, spend more money on the borders of those countries in conflict zones. Don't let them sweep across Europe. And if people do want to move, they should go to the first country and stay there. Well, a lot of people might like that to be the case, but it's not the case. She believes her plan can work. They may not take all that kindly, some of them, to being read a lecture by Britain.
All right. John Pienaar, outside the United Nations in New York. Thanks for joining us on this Daily Politics Special.
Now it's back to the Liberal Democrat conference. And what did activists watching Tim Farron's speech in Brighton make of it all? Our Eleanor Garnier is there. Eleanor.
Yeah, most of the delegates have rushed off to the train station to get back home, but 3 of them promised to talk to me, and here they are, Carol, Stephen and Ellie. First of all, Karen, what did you think of Tim Farron's speech?
I thought it's one of the best he's made, actually, as leader. I thought he was very passionate, very to the point, and yeah, very, very good.
Stephen, what did you make of that really big appeal to Labour moderate voters, praising Tony Blair? Did that sit comfortably with you?
It felt very comfortable. I mean, there was a large portion of the population who voted for Blair in the glory days of 1997 that are feel abandoned. Labour has left the field. They're talking to themselves. You know, there is an open field there that voters desperately want, open, tolerant and a united party. And I think he gave that speech wonderfully.
Everyone's feeling very positive. Ellie, was there anything in there that really appealed to you directly? Obviously, Tim Farron talked about the NHS, about scrapping SATs tests at primary schools, but what in there really directly appealed to you, a younger voter?
The things he said about the refugees really resonated with me. It's something that when I watched the news, I was really shocked about and really disgusted at. So the way he's sort of standing up and defending it and saying that there is a force, there is a party in British politics that is willing to stand up for refugees, that really resonated with me.
And Stephen, what about the referendum? Obviously there's a message that Tim Farron's trying to get out about having a second referendum. Do you think that's a bit of a difficult message? Because in some ways people might feel, well, that's not very respectful for the way they voted in the first place.
It is a difficult situation, I accept, but we have to be proud that our party believes that it's for the best interests of the country. 48% of the population voted for it, and the 52% were lied to. And we need to be very, very clear that it's in the interest of this country to stay in, and we're going to stand for that.
And Carol, as you go away from the conference after your days here, membership's up, everyone seems to be feeling pretty positive, but there's still a huge challenge, isn't there?
It is a big challenge for the party, but I'm sure it's one that Tim and the rest of us will rise to. Our membership going up so high was absolutely amazing after the referendum, and it just shows, I think, that people are maybe looking to the Liberal Democrats to take a lead.
OK, well, thank you very much for staying. We better let these people rush off to the train so they can get back home.
Thanks, Ellie. So would it be fair on domestic policy to sum up Mr Farron's speech is that he and the Lib Dems are now the heir to Blair?
I think that's what he's trying to say. To the really great stuff that Tony Blair and the 1997 Labour government did on workers' rights, on public service investment, and actually we need some of that medicine again.
And will that cut through, do you think? Do you think is that a rich seam to mine?
I think it works in particular as a message within the Westminster bubble. Tim is trying to communicate something, in particular to Labour MPs and Labour activists who feel so disenfranchised by Corbynistas. I think in the end, at some point, for the centre-left to win again, it has to stop talking about Tony Blair and start focusing on the future.
All right. Well, Polly, thank you for being with us, marking our card during that. I fear that all of this may well be overshadowed by the breaking news out of the United States and a number of reports that Angelina Jolie is filing for divorce from Brad Pitt. And I see from the look in your eyes that is a big story.
My goodness.
That's all for our coverage of Tim Farron's final conference speech.